in my behavior. Even in school, the last 2 years of middle school, I completely withdrew from everyone except for that one best friend. There was a time when I tried to interact and mingle with everybody and tried to become part of this clique and that clique and tried to have a boyfriend. But there was a significant withdrawal in 7th and 8th grade, where I literally didn't talk to anybody all day long except for my one best friend. And then we actually, for most of the 7th grade, we weren't even in the same class. So I literally all day didn't really talk to anybody. My grades I was always a pretty good student, although I struggled in math really badly, and that changed at some point. But my grades got better because that was where I focused all my attention and all of my time, and it was also like a scapegoat. Well, this is why she doesn't talk, and this is why she doesn't play. I stopped hanging out at recess. At recess, I used to try to go and run around and play. I mean, when I look back at that person, I'm like, I can't believe I did that. But I stopped doing that, and I literally would just sit on the bench and you know how kids are. My best friend, we went through phases of where she was hanging out and trying to, get in and be cool with other people, and so I would just wind up sitting there by myself. And it was a significant change from, 3rd grade, 4th grade. I'd always been a pretty quiet on the quiet side, but this withdrawal was very different. So my grades got really good, but, the social part, which was already a little lacking just because I'm naturally quiet, got worse. And then riding home on the bus was, just more withdrawal, not really talking, sitting by myself. Nobody would sit with me because I was so strange. In the fact that I wouldn't talk, and so, it's very real for children. So I don't want, if you have a child in your life and they're withdrawn and they're sad, we tend to, as adults, tend to dismiss it because they're children, we take it a little bit more seriously at adolescence because we know that there's hormonal changes and suicide is more likely to happen in adolescents and young adults, and we don't take it serious when our young children are saying, hey, I'm sad, hey, I'm hopeless. We kind of blow it off, like, what do you know about life that you need to feel that way? And I'm going to get to that in a moment, but it's very real. And so I had kind of thought, this is just my personality, which I later found out was just not true. And then high school, we moved from the little town that I grew up in Georgia. We actually moved to Philadelphia when I was 15, and so I came from this small town to this big city as here I am, a freshman in high school. And as I said to you, I had grown up in a small town, and we all, the kids who I started kindergarten with, I stayed with. There was, out of all of those years, maybe 2 people moved away. We were like, friends and people familiar. Even though I wasn't a social butterfly, we were familiar. We knew each other. We knew what each other liked. We knew how class was going to be. We knew each other. We grew up together, and so I'm literally snatched out of that situation and thrown into this big inner city high school. Not even some academic where private school. It was an inner city school. It was had a very poor reputation academically, which my parents didn't know and I didn't know. All we knew is that my parents moved, and this is a school that was around the corner, and I could walk to it, and that's all we knew. My parents didn't come from I was raised by my grandparents. They didn't come from this generation of checking the school and what is the percentage that go to Ivy League college. They didn't care about any of that. They came from a generation of you go to school and you graduate and that's it. They didn't get into all the stuff that parents have to deal with today. And so you can imagine it was quite traumatic for me, coming from this small town, already being a little weird and having my withdrawal issues that I already had, and I'm thrust into this land of Public Enemy music blaring down the hallway, and everybody with big gold chains and sneakers and Jordans or whatever they wore at the time. I mean, I don't know. And I came from the South where the music was very different. We were very much into pop music and heavy metal and stuff like that. And so, and then ethnically where I grew up, the school was very mixed. It had to be 50-50. Black and white. There were no Hispanics, no Asians, nobody even black and white. And to come into this inner city school where it was 98% African American, the other percentage was Hispanic, and never having been around people of different cultures and never having been around city people, I grew up in the country. So all of that, I say that to say that all of that impacted the issues that I was already having, because then, I really had to deal with not only, before I was withdrawn and pulling away, but now I'm in a situation where I'm actually being ostracized because I am so different, and I speak differently, and I like different music, and I dress differently from everybody else, and then just the pure culture shock of coming into that situation, and being in an academic setting that was not even anywhere close to what I had been. I came from a school where the teachers cared very much, and into a setting where I saw just things that I couldn't believe every day. And so I had to deal with that, and then about a couple of months after we moved to Philadelphia, my grandfather passed away, and this is the person who, to me, was my father. He unexpectedly had a heart attack and passed away, which left my grandmother in a state of, depression, which I had never seen her in before. And so all of these things happened, and having to move because of the financial impact of losing my grandfather, having to move to another neighborhood, and just all these things. It's just a snowball of things. But and just then survival mode had to kick in, because one thing about depression is you kind of get into this place of not doing things, not taking care of yourself, and like your paperwork and your bills, and as a kid that turns into for something schoolwork or things like that. And so because my grandmother started to go through depression of her own, grieving over my grandfather, I kind of had to go into survival mode because she couldn't work, and so I had to get a job. And at one point, I had 3 jobs, and I'm still in school, and I'm doing the best that I can academically because I want to get a scholarship to go to college. So I've got that on my shoulders, and just life, I've been becoming an adult, almost, getting ready to turn 18 and thinking about going to college and all that stuff going on. And so I kind of, I think when I kicked into survival mode, it wasn't so obvious to everyone that I was one who suffered with bouts of depression. I came up very differently in those years. Because I was in survival mode, I had to join the debate team. I had to be editor of the yearbook, because all those things had to be on my resume, because that's how you get into a good college. And so I had to cast aside some of the shyness and really kick into, if I'm ever going to get out of this situation, I've got to work and I've got to do this thing and get out of it. And that kicked in, and having encountering some teachers and some mentors at that point in my life who did take me under their wing and say, okay, here's a diamond in the rough. Let's try to get her the best, get her into the next best level that we can get her into. So those years were just much more about surviving, and I really didn't have time. When my grandfather first died, I did go through a period of not going to school, and because I just literally could not go outside of the house, just that's how down I was. But again, survival mode kicks in, that you can't do this and get into college. And so I got back in. I had to make up all those months that I had, hadn't been able to get in, and I just survived. And so then, I finally, graduate, traumatic experiences that I went through, got into the school that I wanted to go to, and then I get there, and I think, oh, I can breathe now. Survival mode lifted because I had reached this goal. I had gotten out of the situation that I was trying to get out of. And as soon as I took the breath, that's when the depression said, oh, now I'm coming back with a vengeance. And so college was very difficult. That's when the real serious bouts of depression started. And then I got complications with the depression. I became agoraphobic. At one point in the semester of my sophomore year, I couldn't even go to certain classes. I would have a panic attack when I would try to leave my room, and one time I actually went to physics lab, and I was standing out because, I always was early, at least 10 to 15 minutes early for every class, and I'm standing there getting ready for a physics lab, and I'm looking around at the people, and all of a sudden these thoughts started going through my mind. You don't belong here. You're out of place. All these crazy thoughts. And I literally started to have a panic attack. And I got around the corner, and because I started breathing, like I was struggling with my breathing. And I left, and I never went back. I dropped the class because I could not go to the lab. It was during the regular semester. I wound up having to take the class in the summer when there's smaller groups. There's a smaller group of people. Because to go into the big, for that particular semester, walking into that big classroom and having to work in the lab, it brought on such anxiety for me. There were other classes, depending on where I was. My freshman year wasn't as bad. I didn't have these panic attacks. They really didn't start until the second year. The agoraphobia, not really having days where I literally couldn't go outside, and then the sleeping started where I could fall asleep on Friday and not wake up until Sunday. I did not lose my appetite. I in fact went the other way and just was able to consume enormous amounts of food. I guess it was like feeding this emptiness inside of me, but some people overeat in depression, some people stop eating. It depends on where you are on the spectrum. Going through that,